Well, Paul, the Morrison government is giving more than 2.5 million Australians access to their own money. That's the key point. This is the public's money, and this is an economic crisis that Australia has not seen for 100 years. And by allowing people early access to super, then they could put that money to good use to get them through the hardship that many are encountering. And what we've seen from the ABS survey data is that around 60% of people are using that money for their day-to-day expenses. A bit more than 30% are putting it into savings, but people are paying down their debts, meeting their rent, meeting their grocery bills, and all the other obligations that come with running a household. And it's Treasury's forecast that some $42 billion will be withdrawn from super by Australians during this crisis, and importantly, this is money that they can access tax-free.
Basically, you've got three levers to pull on at the moment, and look, lots of sub-levers between it, right? But when it comes to debt and deficit, all you can do is cut spending, increase revenue, or you've got to go off and borrow it from somewhere. We know that there are very obvious consequences for all three of these. There are more immediate for some of those options. But I wanted to ask about debt. The IMF yesterday put out a eye-watering number that global GDP, more than 100% of it, so more than the entire world will make, sell, buy, whatever, is currently being borrowed by governments around the world, some $15.4 trillion. Put simply, in terms of Australia, who do we owe? Where is our debt parked? Is someone in a position to pull a string and something happens?
Well, we issue bonds, and they are bought mainly by fund managers and by banks. And about a third of our debt is held onshore by Australian institutions and Australian debt holders, and about 2/3 is overseas. But Australia is a very reliable partner for many of these institutions and fund managers. And so when we issue these bonds to raise money to meet our increased debt levels, we've tended to be oversubscribed. And right now, there are historically low interest rates. So when we're borrowing money for 5 years, we're paying an interest rate of about 0.4%. When we're borrowing money for 10 years, it's about 0.9%. And just recently we issued a 30-year bond, Paul, which was at around 1.94%. So what we have done is issued bonds on the international markets that go to banks, that go to fund managers, in order to meet the expenses that we have to incur during this crisis. But you're right, this money will have to be paid back by future generations.
Also, you know, I get a bit frustrated with some of my mates, but some of the people who, you know, I don't agree with much, about JobKeeper. Now, I'm of the view that if JobKeeper doesn't exist, then the unemployment queue gets longer by a couple of million people. And the older you get, the harder it is to return to the workforce. Now, is there a cost with having JobKeeper? Are there some people that are a little over, a little under? Sure. But am I right with my fundamental assumption that if not for JobKeeper, the dole queue gets longer? There's no option where the government is spending less on welfare because they'd be drawing it in this form and a chance of keeping their job, or another form where they could be on it for years and years.
Well, you're absolutely right about JobKeeper being an economic lifeline for millions of Australians. And what the Treasury and ABS survey data has shown is about 44% of those businesses who are using JobKeeper have been influenced to keep their staff on rather than letting them go. And that's the critical point. It's maintained that formal connection between an employer and an employee and helping them get through this crisis.
Are you surprised that still 1 week after you mentioned Reagan and Thatcher, they're still writing about it? Like the channel, every day, they're like, this was a one and done, wasn't it?
Well, people are obviously a bit bored for their own good. I mean, at the end of the day, what I was talking about there is the importance of reforms, like cutting red tape, like cutting taxes, and those historical experiences show that the economy can be stronger for those policies. So I'm not going to wash my mouth out with soap simply because I've angered a few in the Twitter swamp out there.